Hello, everybody. And today it's my absolute pleasure to be joined for this Story Live by Dorothy Dix. Welcome, Dorothy, to Story Live. Lovely to see you, looking radiant as always.
Well, thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you for having me on board. I feel really honored to be on your Facebook Live, and it's always an absolute pleasure to spend time with you. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. We do a lot of laughing, Dorothy, don't we?
We do. Life is too short.
Not to, absolutely. So we first met, didn't we, through being part of the Athena network, and you have several memberships within Athena for the charity, don't you? Or you have done.
Yes.
And I was really interested in the charity, and I'm going to get you to say a little bit more about it, because what resonated with me is that whole concept of changing children's lives, i.e. creating better futures, but in particular for girls, because I at the time was really focusing on working with women in corporates and so on, helping them step up in their career. And of course, the first step to empowerment for anybody, whether it is boys, girls, men, women, is that education piece, isn't it? But it's also more about what would happen to them if they didn't. But I don't want to give the game away, so I'll say a bit more about that when we get to that point. But it was during our conversation, and I remember it well, we were in the foyer of the Novotel Hotel in Reading, weren't we?
Yeah.
And as you talked about the charity, I became really enthralled with the story. And I remember saying to you, well, I think I've just talked myself into becoming an ambassador for the charity. And, you know, so far have done very little in that role because, of course, there hasn't been a huge amount for me to do in this last year. But I did come and help Michael compare the charity ball in 2019, which was great fun. And we were all going to do that again, weren't we, last year? But hopefully this year.
Yes.
Dorothy, please fire ahead and tell us how and why you set up the charity and what it's all about.
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, I set up the charity Creating Better Futures in 2012 as a way of giving back the gift of education that had been given to me. Having grown up in Zimbabwe, I faced the challenge of, even before I was born, not being wanted by my father. And both my parents were 18 at the time when they were expecting me, and they were not married. And along came this child. And if I had turned out to be a boy, I would have had more opportunities. My father would have obviously wanted me to carry on with the family name, with the bloodline, to be the head of the family. And I believe that I turned out to be who God wanted me to be. I turned out to be me. And I just had this amazing fighting spirit that now I look back into my young years, and I just wonder how I was so strong through a lot of the predictions of the fact that I would probably end up being a teenage mom like my mother had been, and I would have been a single mom, and I would have struggled through my life. Just presumptions that people made over me. And I remember hearing it from quite a young age and thinking to myself, I'm going to prove them wrong. I'm going to do something that will really show that I can be an individual, I can be a different person. So having gone through that experience, and then through the kindness of extended family members, my grandparents, and also non-governmental organizations like Rotary and churches that were working in Zimbabwe, my education was really complemented with a lot of support, a lot of encouragement, a lot of positivity, and mainly from complete strangers that I hadn't met that believed in my potential. And so it's worth investing in my future, in my education. So that really humbled me from a very young age. And that really grew the passion in me to set up the charity. And also in my mother to help out, because as a single mom, she had been supported a lot for me to get incredible opportunities. And so we vowed, when I applied for my very first scholarship at the age of 16, we vowed, both of us, that this comes through, we one day want to give back that gift of education. And it
Lovely.
truly has, through
Yeah.
so many opportunities, through my education in Norway, here in Reading, and now with Creating Better Futures, that wonderful support of incredible people like yourself, who the first time we met, we immediately had that connection, that passion, that desire to make a difference. And I was really drawn to you because you had a very genuine way of finding out the story behind every woman and actually strengthening them in sharing their story. And you made it look so easy, and you made it look so natural. It was just like having a chat, and you just unfolded so much of my own story during that conversation. And I just thought Rachel would just make an incredible ambassador for the charity, and I'm so pleased that we've got you on board.
Oh, thank you, Dorothy. And it's interesting now looking back that you say that, because that's the first time you said that to me. And of course, now what I'm doing in my business is exactly that, helping women to tell their story. And often I do seem to be the first person that they share parts of their story with, which is a huge privilege. And I never underestimate how much of a privilege it is. But, you know, I am that person on the bus stop that people would unfold their story to, whether I wanted them to or not. But I want to dip back then to that little girl back in Zimbabwe, who clearly you did have that strength or power within you. I'm guessing you were quite a handful as a little girl, Dorothy. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, I was. I remember my grandmother saying she wished she had a little bell, because I was the only grandchild for about 5 years, and I was their first grandchild. So they took me everywhere they went, and they owned a shop, and I used to sit underneath the counter, and I would hear them changing the coins, the change when they were serving people, and so I would be writing it down. And then when we got to their house, because I lived with them since my mother lived in a different town, so that she could go to work. So I lived with my grandparents from the age of 9 months, and I used to then go to the chicken run and start teaching the chickens the math that I had learned in the shop. And my grandmother used to always say, "Oh, I wish we had a bell just to say time to stop now." But she taught me so much before I actually stepped into a classroom. I knew how to write my name. I knew so many different things that had prepared me for school. And I was really fortunate. I got put into a different class a year ahead because of all the stuff that my grandmother and my grandfather had taught me during that time. So I was quite a handful.
Yeah, but that's incredible, isn't it? And then it takes somebody like you to come along every now and again to challenge the system, because for all of us, it's so easy to grow up within the expectations of the society that we grow up in. Even now, I speak to women who have been born and brought up within the UK, where we sort of think we've got so many opportunities, but probably 4 or 5 years ago now, but a woman who was brought up in the north of England, where the culture is possibly slightly different. I mean, there are regional differences, of course there are here. And her parents' expectation was that as the girl in the family, she would stay living at home until she married, and she'd train to be a hairdresser or a beautician or something like that. Now, nothing wrong with either of those jobs, but it wasn't what she wanted, and it wasn't what they expected for her twin brother either. That was the rub. And actually, he was the one who stayed local doing let's say a skill rather than a profession. And she eventually moved away and put herself through uni and so on. So sometimes it does take that extra thing of, actually, I'm not going to take this expectation, which is clearly what you had. But tell us a little bit more then. So you, at the age of what, how old would you have been when you started at the local school?
At the local school, I was 5 years old.
Okay.
Yes, near turning 6 that year, because the academic year starts in January
Okay.
and ends in December in Zimbabwe. So I remember the first day of school, I hardly slept. I was really keen, really looking forward to school. And the school was right next to a church where my grandparents were the reverend and leaders within that church. So I had been very much used to being called out to the front to recite a Bible verse. And so I had known the community around me quite a lot. So that just really helped me in the transition into the school world. Whereas if I had lived with my mum, who was in the capital city, it was busier and it was more of different communities coming together to a school. So that really helped as well. It gave me a lot of confidence. And I remember my grandma especially, she just used to tell me, you can do anything you want to. Don't let anybody tell you can't do anything. So I was one of those students who had like my hand up the whole time. Yes, I've got the
Yes.
answer. I've got, and sometimes I'd put my hand up and think, oh, what was the answer again? What was the question?
And I think that was such a gift that your grandmother gave you, to say you can be anything that you want to be, because that's a hard message to convey as a parent or a carer or a grandparent, isn't it? That, so many people are, without meaning to be, limit, and sometimes we hear it. I mean, I hear it, the people who are limited to the path they follow. So for it's not necessarily about success and opportunity, but you often hear about people whose parents wanted them to be a solicitor, an accountant, or a nurse, or a teacher, when what they wanted to do was something completely different. So it's very often meant with the absolute best intentions, isn't it? But to have given you that message at such a young age. So tell us a little bit about the educational system in Zimbabwe then. So you start school at 5,
Yeah.
and that's in your local village.
Yes, so that's where I started. There are different school systems. I went to a rural school in a place called Chitakatira, where my grandparents live now, and I've always lived. And it's you whether you go to a rural school or to an urban school, you can't go to school without paying school fees. So
Okay.
yes, and the school fees differs between the different schools. So the school that I went to, being a rural school, at the moment, it depends on in the area, but there are schools ranging between 10 to 20 US dollars at primary school level. And then secondary school level, it goes from 30 upwards, sometimes to hundreds, depending on the kind of system that's at the school. And so at that time, if you were going to school and your parents couldn't afford to pay your school fees, you'd be allowed to come for the first week or two of school, and then you would have an assembly. And I remember it so well, where all the children who hadn't paid their school fees, their names would be called out at assembly, and then they would be told, because they hadn't paid school fees, they would go home. And so fortunately enough, because of the support that I received from my family, I wasn't sent home myself, but I used to see it on the other end because of my grandparents' role within the community as church leaders and having their shop there. They used to then have the children who had been sent home coming to the shop with their parents. And these were parents who usually had an account with them where, they would get some groceries each month and then pay whenever they could, and sometimes those debts would just be wiped off. And so then they also had an account where they were helping children whose parents couldn't afford to pay for them to go to school. And so I had seen this before I had actually stepped into a classroom. I had seen children coming to the shop who my grandparents were helping to go to school. And then I had also seen them at the end of each term bringing their school reports to show my grandparents, because obviously they had done well at school, and that it would encourage the continued support. So it's like I saw that model of the charity already while I was growing up, and they just had a huge passion. Now they don't run their business, but it was more of a service to the community. And so, having been brought up in that, I really felt empowered that there is something that I can do to help, to give back. So so the school system, usually between 5 and 6 when children start, and then they finish secondary school between the ages of 12 and 13, and it's a 7-year primary school education. And then they have the first 2 years of secondary school. They're called, so primary school is called grade 1 to grade 7. And usually within that system as well, you get students who do really well go into a different classroom, and those who are sort of behind go into a separate classroom so that they can meet the different needs. Then at secondary school, that determines which subjects they do. So the ones who've done quite well at primary school might go into the sciences, the maths, and then the ones who have not done quite so well might go into the arts and subjects like that at secondary school. And then so to qualify, they have to write an exam at the end of grade 7, which determines what they study at secondary school. And then during the second stage of secondary school, which is 2 years, so Form 1 and Form 2, at the end of Form 2, they write another exam, which enables them to carry on to Form 3 and Form 4, which is the 4 years of secondary school. Are you still following me? I don't know. It's a mouthful. And then they write the GCSEs at Form 4, which is around about 15, 16, okay, which is when I did my GCSEs. And back then, way back then, without giving my age away, our exams were Cambridge certified. And so we very much followed the British system in curriculum that we had in Zimbabwe.
Okay. And all of that would still have been relatively local, Dorothy, would it?
So when I was in grade 3, I went to live with my mother and my stepfather. She had remarried then. Okay. And I went to a different school. I went to an urban school. But yes, the system is the same. And it all just depends on affordability. So you'll find that in most rural areas, people might have had basic primary school education, but very few would qualify to go into secondary school, and after secondary school going on to do their A levels, and very, very few going on to university. Whereas in the urban schools, sometimes they can have the support to be financially to be able to do secondary school education. Right. So my passion is to bridge that gap between the haves and the have-nots. And I believe that education is such a long-term solution to poverty, and it empowers people. It gives them it opens opportunities for them. And it just allows them to find out how much potential they've got and to actually achieve that. So that's why I'm really passionate about what I do.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. It's like when my kids were at school, I mean, they're in their 20s now. So, but you know, that they used to say, oh, well, I want to give maths up, or oh, I want to give French up. And I could see that they were perfectly capable at it. So I would always say, just keep it going, because it all keeps the doors open for as long as possible. And, you know, by the time they did GCSE, if they wanted to give it up, that's what would happen. But it just opens doors. It's not the be all and end all, is it? Education. We know some very successful people that certainly didn't get an A level to their name, maybe not do terribly well at GCSEs either. So it is possible to be very successful without it, but it just keeps those doors open.
Yes, it does.
I think it's so important. So let's fast forward on. And something I've learned today, I didn't realise that your mum was part of that decision to start the charity, even at that stage. But tell us a little bit more about the charity, what it does, and what you aspire to continue to do in the future.
Thank you. So yes, my mom's very much been an instrumental part of the charity, and she encouraged me to pursue an education so that I would achieve the things that she hadn't managed to achieve herself. And when I left Zimbabwe at the age of 16, my very first summer job when I was studying in Norway was picking strawberries. Very glamorous, absolutely loved it. And it was I was so proud of it being my first job. And I sent some money back that I had earned from the strawberry picking to my mom, and then she identified orphans and vulnerable children within the community that needed help to go to school. And so we started off with one child here and there that we were supporting, and it was very informal in terms of it was people that we knew, children whose parents were deceased and were doing really well at school and had been sent home, and we just carried on supporting them that way. Then the word spread, as it does when you're doing something like that and there is such great need. And so the numbers increased, and throughout my studies at university here in Reading, I used to work part-time, and I used to send money as well back to my mother. So the numbers were growing until one day in 2010, she rang me and she said, we've had a call from the Welfare Society, and they have 83 orphans and vulnerable children, which is a third of a school that's most likely to close down completely because they can't pay the school fees, teachers can't get paid, the facilities there are just dilapidated. No, the classrooms, the toilets, everything was just in desperate need of help. And then I spoke to my husband, Michael, who's always had a passion to help out, and who, when I first met him and he'd heard my story, he just really wanted to get involved. And at first I thought he was just trying to impress me, but yeah, it turns out
you're still there.
Genuine passion. So we took the big step of me, while on maternity leave, just deciding that we're going to go down to one salary as a family, and we're going to do this and do it well, because I felt that it was something that I couldn't partly do because it was such a big need, and I really felt that, I for me to fulfill it well, I needed to take that step. So it was a very scary step. It was a step that I thought there are so many things that we had planned we would be doing as a family, that we would be making quite a lot of sacrifices. But those sacrifices have really paid off in the sense of the lives that have been transformed through that opportunity to go to school. So now in 2021, we've got 5,135 children that we are supporting as a charity. There are more than 1 million children that are orphaned and vulnerable in Zimbabwe. But what we have chosen to do is to be really responsible and not spread ourselves too thin, and increase the numbers to such an extent that we struggle with our resources as a small organization. So what we're doing is, with those 5,135 who are within our care, is to really support them throughout the primary, secondary school and post-secondary school journey, so that we have that long-term support and that long-term commitment to their education. And my mother is absolutely brilliant. Whenever I go to Zimbabwe, I just realize that I share her as a mom with so many thousands of other children. She does an amazing job with the support of her church, our volunteers and Rotarians in Zimbabwe, who run projects with very, very little resource, but they're doing so well in reaching out. And once lockdown is lifted, we hope that we will continue our mission trips out to Zimbabwe, so that so many of our supporters can see our work firsthand.
Fabulous, fabulous. And I think a point that's really important to make here, Dorothy, is how a small amount, I mean, I sponsor one child and I think it costs me £25 a month, but yes, a huge amount for a family in Zimbabwe to raise, isn't it?
It is, yes.
And,
There are many families that are living at less than $1 per day.
yes.
And the children that we help as well are extra special in the sense that they have lost either one or both parents to AIDS and HIV.
Oh, wow.
And now, even during the pandemic as well, some have lost their guardians who are usually grandparents that look after them. So the need for our help is just, it has really increased during the lockdown with children that are sponsored, like your sponsored child, for example. We've been able to carry on supporting her through the lockdown by providing monthly food parcels, where we used to take the monthly food supply to the school, and this was distributed from school, and they had 2 meals a day at school. We now have been going out to the community and bring these food parcels to them at home.
Wow.
And in times where we've been able to provide a PPE hand washing kits and sanitizers and reusable masks. So it's really transformed the way we've been working. But my mother is really passionate about making sure that we don't lose contact with any
Yes.
of these children.
Yes.
And in cases where their guardians have been impacted by the virus, she has found alternative solutions to make sure that the children are looked after. And they return to school next week on Monday, on the 15th.
Yee, exciting. I bet they all can't wait.
Oh.
I love seeing the bits of footage where, of them at school, and they seem so enthusiastic to be there. And I think, sometimes, I sort of enjoyed school, I think, but, and obviously not everybody does. And I guess that applies in Zimbabwe as well. But there seems to be such a real joy for them to be at school, whereas we, of course, can take all of that for granted, can't we?
Yes.
Yes, children get a school meal if they need it, they get help with uniform, but actually to go to school doesn't cost us any more than it would, to not go to school, as it were, because if your child doesn't go to school, then you've got to buy their lunch and clothes anyway, haven't you?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think it's really lovely what you're doing. But just tell us a little bit, particularly for the girls, Dorothy, what would happen in the normal expectation? We started talking earlier about, not fitting the mold and not doing what was expected. But what is a normal pattern, particularly for some of the girls, if they're not in education beyond the age of about 11 or 12?
Yes, sadly, there are cases where even amongst children that we have known as a charity, where because they're an orphan girl and they're looked after usually by extended family members, when they get to puberty in those cases, then they're worth a lot as a bride. And so when somebody gets married, the husband's family give bride price to the family of the girl. And usually this is in the form of money or in the form of livestock, usually cows, which are seen as a sign of wealth, a symbol of wealth within a family. And we've had a number of cases, not so many because of the way we monitor the children when they're at school and the way we support them. But we have had rare cases where they have been married off. And we had one girl who she was doing really well at primary school, and her family hadn't been able to afford to send her to school, and she lived with her grandmother as well as the cousins who were children of her grandmother's other children, and they had all sadly passed away. So this grandmother had 9 children that she was
Gosh.
Yes, and this girl was brilliant. Since when we started as a charity, we'd been supporting her. Then when schools reopened in January, in the year that she was meant to be at secondary school, she did not turn up at school. And the good thing is, because we work directly with the schools, we get up-to-date reports about who's turned up, who's not, and also we do visits to the schools to see how the children are keeping on. So my mother was informed that she had gone for the school holidays to visit an uncle and his wife and children, which used to be a treat for her to go and visit family, different cousins. And And then she had never come back. And so my mother traced it to another side of the country and found out that she had been married, and she was the third wife to a man who was in his 60s, and she was only 13 years old. And it was just an incredibly sad situation. But we did what we could. We worked with the social welfare office, and we worked with the child protection officers, and we were able to annul that marriage because it was illegal, and we're able to refer the case, for her to be able to come back to school. And so yes, she came back to school, carried on doing really, really well, and she's at secondary school now. And she's just one of many stories where girls are seen as being more valuable as a woman and as a wife. Traditionally, it used to be accepted. So we are really using education as a tool of not just educating the children within the classroom, but then beyond that as well, of the choices that they can make with regards to their health and well-being, with regards to the decisions that usually would be made for them. And it was poverty that forced this family to give her away in marriage. So we believe that if we can empower the local community to be able to support themselves, then such decisions won't be made. The same doesn't happen to boys, because when they get married, they're the ones paying bride price. So it's seen as the boys should go to school so they get a good job and they can marry a good wife and be able to pay bride price. So, and I believe that the potential of the human mind, the potential of a human being is not limited to gender. I believe that both girls and boys can achieve anything. They can achieve their potential, and that they can help their community as well. We want more successful girls and young women to really highlight the plight that, of the girls that sadly poverty makes decisions for them that mean that their lives are very different. So we love sharing those stories, and I love working with you because you are looking at the potential of women just in the same way that I am, and you teach me so much about how you do that and how you're able to really share those stories and to help and to inspire and to empower other women as well. So I'm absolutely blessed.
Thank you. I think what's really important about that story that you've just shared is that, I mean, here in the West, we would think, well, that's dreadful. And you say it is now not a legal thing to do. So obviously society is changing in Zimbabwe, but it's still not completely anormal, is it? It's, you can't judge an action of somebody from a different pair of eyes, within what they're doing. Isn't quite as bad as if it was ever possible to do that sort of thing here, which of course it's not, but that has been the norm of the culture for a long time. And it kind of reminds me, it's that thing, isn't it, that if that girl had been 18, however awful that sounds, that she was married to somebody, third wife to somebody in their 60s, there's still a bit of a difference of a child of 13 being in that position, young woman of 18, because by the time you're 18, you're a little bit better placed to have your say, and so on. And it reminds me of years ago, I worked with juvenile offenders, and we offered a project for children who, again, this time mainly boys, who were coming up into court for something that they were likely to be sent into custody for. And these kids were all under the age of 17 and mostly 13, 14. And the theory behind our project was that there was a lot of research to show that if a young person went into a custodial provision at that age, they were far more likely to continue a life of crime. Have to survive in that institution, where one of the ways of surviving is to align themselves with gangs and all of that. Whereas if you can keep them out of custody until they're 17, typically what will happen by then, they will get a job, they'll get a girlfriend, and they'll carry on a legal way of life.
Mm,
There's a bit of a parallel there, isn't there? Because if you can
yes.
prevent that girl in particular from going into that thing of being married off and whatever, by
Mm,
putting her in education, that by the time she comes out of the end of education, not only is she better educated and can contribute so much back to her community, but she has more confidence, she's got more information, she's much better placed to carry on and live her own life. And I think too, that thing about, we say here, oh, educate a girl, you educate a family. I think in Africa and Zimbabwe, it's educate a girl, educate a child, isn't it? This applies to boys as well. You educate the community. So I think what you're doing there around educating the communities as well is fabulous. Dorothy, we could go forever, couldn't we?
yes.
But do you have you shared a couple of stories there, but do you have a specific story? Because what I love with sharing stories is that there to be some learning for the audience. And I'm sure our audience today will have been fascinated by everything you've had to say, but do you have a particular story where there's a learning that you could pass on for the audience?
Yes, I have many stories. And I think one that I would like to share, we're in March, and it's a month of inspiring and empowering each other as women and celebrating women's successes and achievements. And we have had a lot of success through our Choose to Challenge campaign. And the story that I would like to share in that is about vulnerability. For me to be here, for me to be able to talk about creating better futures, it wasn't a thing that I was always comfortable with, because my past had not been easy. The things that had happened to me had been quite challenging, and I just thought, this is just my story and nobody needs to know about it, and it's not going to help and empower anyone. But I realized that in my vulnerability, came my courage to be able to say, this is why I decided to do what I do. This is why I've made the sacrifices that I have made. And so I would just encourage women to be authentic, to be genuine, to share their true self, to share their true story. People buy from people, talk to people, people want to communicate and to relate to people. And sometimes we can be brave in, just by sharing who we are and the genuine us. And so that's a big learning for me, that I would like to inspire so many other women out there to say, everybody has a story to tell. Everybody has something amazing to share about who they are and what they have done. And currently one of our students who is at the University of Zimbabwe right now, she shares her story and it absolutely inspires me. She's only in her teens, but she shares the very difficult experience she went through with her mother passing away when she was really, really young, and having a baby brother who needed looking after, and a couple of years later her father, who was a guardian, going blind and not being able to work and needing help and support himself, and how just through that vulnerability she was able to find courage, able to approach us as an organization and say she needed help, she needed that support, which was just something really remarkable for her to be able to step up and do that. So as women, as girls, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to be vulnerable, and it's okay to use that vulnerability as a source of our courage.
Lovely. I love that in your vulnerability, you find courage. I love that, Dorothy. Thank you. So how can people find you and get in touch with you? And because you're supporting a charity and founding a charity, most importantly, how can they offer support to the charity if they feel moved to do that?
Yes, so we are always looking for volunteers. We have a lot of opportunities where people can help, whether it's organizing events, fundraising, whether it's recruiting other volunteers and supporting, whether it's projects, managing a lot of our projects that we do, empowering the community and educational projects. We've also got online marketing, digital marketing for people that have experience in that sector. So everybody can contribute towards the cause, and it doesn't have to be a full-time position. They could, if they could spare 5 hours a week here and there, that could be 1 hour a day where they can help and support us. That would be great because it helps us to plan when we know we've got enough people on the team, and it helps us to also reach out to more children when we know we've got that resource of people supporting us. We're always looking for people to partner with us, whether they're a school, their community, society, a club. We're always keen to have those partnerships to provide those long-term commitments to supporting the charity. We also have various ways that people can fundraise for us on our website right now, which is creatingbetterfutures.org.uk. There are virtual fundraising ideas while we wait for restrictions to be lifted for us to have ways of fundraising in person. But there's so many fun ways that people can help. We have various campaigns on our blog page, and at the moment we've got the Choose to Challenge campaign, which is great fun, where people record who they are, what they do, what they choose to challenge, and that inspires other women as well, not just women in Zimbabwe, but it's just become a global movement of people supporting each other to succeed. We are also on social media. If you look up Creating Better Futures or at CBF UK, we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn. So, and if you'd like to contact us, it's info@creatingbetterfutures.org.uk. And I'd like to say that there is a way that everybody can get involved. It doesn't matter what skills people have. So the little that you have with the little that somebody else has can become a lot to make a massive difference.
That's wonderful, Dorothy. And once we finish this call, perhaps you could add some of those links anyway to the chat and so on the page. Dorothy, thank you so much. As always, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I found out different things I didn't know about your story, which is always good to hear. Yeah, your energy is always infectious. And just to close, what it was that you, because I remember saying to you once, Dorothy, you always look really good. And what was it your mum used to say to you? That if you're going to show up dressed up or something, wasn't it?
Yes. Yes, she used to say to me, if you're gonna show up, make sure you show up and you dress up.
I love that, because always at the very least you've got a bow or something, and yeah, really your personal presence is massive. So you really
thank you very much. I love color. It's a way of expressing myself, and I have to say there was a time where I thought actually in the corporate world most people would just wear normal black and white or gray or blue, or and then I thought actually I wasn't built to fit into
fitting in is not in your DNA, Dorothy. On that note, I'm going to thank you so much for joining me today, and
thank you.
I do hope that we'll do this again some other time.